In the beginning, at the simplest point of a soul's individuation, when it first becomes a spark or a seed, it starts as something like this, filled with its own unique and sacredly sung infusion of the primordial archetypes, essentially. The different strains and flavors and harmonic tones of primordial source. All crafted and sung into the harmony of your soul's unique song. And when that source seed is first sung, the experiences that evolve that seed into a soul body can have a lot of variations, but it'll usually look a little bit like this. As the source seed is in, the most common place a source seed resides when first being sung is in the nursery realms. And so when a source seed is created, it also depends on the anchor universe that it was sung in, because each anchor universe essentially has its own mini version of the primordial universe, essentially a source well of their source seed. A source seed for a universe is different than a source seed of a individualized soul, but we won't get into that today. And so the souls that are birthed from that well have a unique coding flavor that those who are specialists in it can differentiate to determine. And so all of that is basically swimming around in this little source seed, all of this essence and energy. And the nursery realm, for example, is a place that is crafted to be kind of the waiting stage. I guess it could kind of be like the uterus of a universe. That seems too human-centric, but I guess, we'll leave that there in some ways. But it's a realm-like state. And so in this place, the soul is experiencing its first encounter with, depending on the dimensional layout, time, or an encounter with totality. At this state, you're not really aware too much of totality, but you might be aware of other source seeds. It all depends on the setup. But throughout all of this process, this energy within the source seed is starting to meld and mesh and converge and clash and create this experience of exploring what this unique essence is. It's the early stages of that consciousness development for a soul body. And so, in particular, this is also for the macro soul. But as this energy is being in tension and flow and chaos and expression and kind of exploring what they look like, their unique frequencies and tones and unique shades of perspective, what they look like in connection to each other. It starts to create this aura around the seed. This gentle grid or essence that is an amalgamate of that source seed expression, that unique essence that differentiates souls from other souls, that thing that remains inherently and innately you, no matter the incarnation or expression that you're experiencing life from. And this kind of amalgamate expression forms the early stages of essentially the authenticity grid. And this is the first and most foundational expression of a soul. And it's what many souls use when looking for origin, what they key into. It is the foundational auric layer that all other foundational layers blend and add on to. It's the layer that eventually turns into the totality grid, the totality auric field for the macro soul, the totality soul of your unique individuation. And so that's, if you had to put them to numbers, you could say the source seed is the 0 and the authenticity grid is the 1, the first soul mechanism in this kind of foundational outlook. And as that auric energy is building and complexifying and building energetic quality around the source seed, it starts to kind of pick up a rhythm and pick up a flow and a state of movement. And so you might see the setup change a little bit. Let me show it to you this way. So say that is the source seed, And then damn it. Da, 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 da. Okay. Bum, bum, bum. So here's the source seed. And then this is the color we're using for the authenticity grid. So at first when this is happening, it's just like a light essence around the source seed. And then as it starts to pick up momentum, and force, and it starts to develop cohesion, and you're starting to figure out this, the soul is starting to kind of develop its consciousness, its perspective, its kind of get its bearings on what consciousness and awareness is. It starts to get a little bit bigger, and maybe that field is spreading a little bit more. And so through that, you're also seeing that, say for example, it's starting to pick up a flow, starting to kind of give an example of rhythm. It's starting to kind of take a little bit of shape in that. It's not so amalgamous. It's starting to have a little bit of, underneath that kind of overarching aura around the source seed, underneath that, they're starting to build a flow and a current, kind of like that. But it keeps developing. Let's say like that. And this keeps developing. And through all that, from the authenticity grid and this flow and this convergence and this energy that's also at the same time moving in, like I said, convergence and confliction and all those good words, contradiction and tension and friction, you know, all the synonyms, against that source seed, building up this natural rhythm and momentum, you start to see something like this form. And it starts to look like that. This concentration at the center of this field. And you can also, you'll notice if you also move it a different way, it starts to look like a toroidal field. But at that center, there's that core. And so that is the early development of the authenticity core. I know, groundbreaking. But this develops all of these mechanisms. This is like the earliest and simplest expression of them. So they all take on more complexity and depth and added mechanics within them. And so from there, let's see, how do I want to do this? So as the soul starts to develop, really within the first incarnation or two, sometimes even before that, depending on the start, the source seed is hidden. The source seed is something that really can only be seen by your soul and like specialists. It's like a HIPAA thing almost. Like there's like, it's a very sacred thing. Like I almost feel itchy even simplifying it to the extent that we are, but it's something that is always hidden. There's so many other ways to get information about your origin or your unique essence or whatever besides the source seed. The source seed is something that also would never be able to be translated into human language. It just would not. And so you can look at the authenticity grid or the hub, which we'll get to, and all these other mechanisms and places within your information. The records, depending on which scale of records you're in, can tell you different points of your origin, and it all depends on the vantage point you're looking at origin from. And so over time, like I said, the seed will get absorbed. Essentially, it goes into a very special mechanism structure. It's one that we'll have to, that would be a more advanced School of Primordiality lesson for that. But the source seed gets put in a safe place within these early mechanisms for this process, and so you will see it disappear. So that 0 point origin essence, you wouldn't really see that. In its place through that, though, that, let's use a slightly different color, you would see that authenticity core. Oh, I'm not sure why I have that one. I don't have the answers. So anyways, you would start to have that authenticity core that is developing, and over time, like I said, it develops more specialized mechanisms within that, but that authenticity core is the core point through which you can access all other points in the sphere. It begins to be a conduit flow, a directing point, the orientation point of your soul, most significantly for this context of this current season that we're discussing this in. And so there's the authenticity core. The seed is hidden in there. The authenticity grid. So we start to have like the first few stages, the 0, 1, 2, and 3, if you will, of a soul body development. And so all souls, no matter anything, they will always have this, basically, is like the bare minimum that all souls will contain, no matter the incarnation, no matter the expression, this little trifecta. If a soul is entering into an incarnation of any type, even more void or shadow based or whatever, they will still have these base essences. And so this will be important for the next section of this discussion. But before we do that, I want to add on 2 more mechanisms. And so as this is further developing, these first few layers are very flow-based, very toroidal in a lot of ways. And so, okay. The next one, I'm actually totally forgetting. The next one, I was about to jump ahead. The polysystem. How could I forget? So before I get to the authenticity hub, as this energy is flowing and moving, then you're starting to experience the first major incarnations and expressions of exchange and interaction. And so the 3 is the polysystem. And so that's when that energy moves beyond all internally based, for the most part, into the first processes of external exchange. And so, am I on a new layer? Yeah. And so this energy, the flow and the structure of it, once it develops, the polysystem can look several different ways. It can have very different shapes, but the simplest way to describe it is this more tightly wound current of energy that essentially loops out and not quite hooks energy from the totality structures, but in some ways, I guess you could say that the very earliest expression of it, like when it's first kind of coming into form, that's kind of how it works. And when it first comes into form, it can look like a grid where you see this this more tightly bound and looped version of this flow of energy. You'll see it, depending on like the experience and what's going on, it can first form as a grid like this, where it distinctly has this quality of looping out and kind of pulling in energy, where it essentially covers the entire structure. You can also see it more as internalized structure. The structure for the base level of polysystem is totally different on Earth, but it's just because it's more complex. But this quality of exchange, this balanced, I mean, you all know the symbol. This is nothing groundbreaking. But this is the momentum shift of the polysystem. And so you're starting to see it garner a little bit more complexity in expression and texture and connection and all those good things. And so we'll talk more in the future about how the polysystem is actually shaped and structured, but what is probably most valuable to show you from a breath perspective is how the Pala system, okay, I'm not quite sure why I drew it like that, but so let's throw that in there. All right. And so what I also want you to pay attention to with this energetic is this collision point in the center and this tension point that expands outward in a balanced and equal way. That's what's most important to think about with the Pala. Is that really also, I should have it, oh, what have I done? Looping out, pulling out, having that hooking quality that pulls in from the external reality. Okay, so you'll see me talk about that concept more in depth later. But that is that first mechanism system within the soul body that starts to, in these first core energetics, they're all about internal development, exploration of purely all internalized soul body energy. And this is the first one where it starts to be a mechanism of complexification that is focused on that one of its foundational purposes is to draw from the totality in order to influence and alter and change the friction and tension and interactions within the source seed essences, all of the unique energies that make up all of the different grids. And so this is that first layer, because all of these, the core and the grid were made entirely of source seed essence, your unique source fuel. This is the first one that begins the transmutation process also of turning external energy into your internal energy, and that exchange process that uses the external as fuel for your internal. And there are some implications of this also, of course, having mutual exchange impact on the external, but usually in the beginning stages, not always, but a lot of times in the beginning stages, it is more, I guess you could say, parasitic of the totality in many ways, because the soul body structure is so simplified that it hasn't quite, the more advanced mechanics haven't hit yet in most cases, for it to be it be focused more on impacting and pulling from the internal source and giving to the external. So there's that. But there is that capacity. And like I said, this mechanism evolves and expands pretty significantly as the soul incarnates and develops over time. This is just like a rough, simplified example of the energy, so that you have the foundations in mind. And so, as this is all happening, we also see, let's see, let's do, we will do the next one is, you could say is 4, and that would be the authenticity hub. So this is when the soul begins to develop a storage. Hubs are pretty much always a storage of other mechanisms and other energetic information. Not always information, but they tend to be containers and to be there's usually some of the foundational structures, not always, but hubs tend to be the foundational structures. They tend to be some of the base systems that hold the more specialized systems within them. And so we have the authenticity hub that begins to develop. Is that enough of a color contrast? Let me see. Perhaps in this case, I should use a different color. Usually I would use a similar color for the hub, but I want to make sure that it's a little bit more color contrasty. We'll use like a light color. Let's go back to that. Let's see. Is that better? As if you're responding to me. Okay, so we have another toroidal sphere starting to form within this. And really, realistically, the authenticity grid is staying above everything. And let's see, would be the overarching totality structure. But obviously we need to be able to see, so we're just going to make it real thin like that and go back to that. So then we have the authenticity hub. And so around this time, the next one is also developing pretty much concurrently. They tend to happen in pretty rapid fashion, but not always. So again, the authenticity hub, especially in its base level, it's beginning to hold memory store, to hold the awareness of the sequences of events. It's where a lot of Akashic Records data can be stored. It's where it tends to be connected to a lot of the more time-based thresholds of like dimensions and that kind of thing. So we have that starts to take shape. And again, you start to see this convergence point in the center that starts to happen. And this can move down and it can shift and kind of take up different amounts of space, but especially in this early stage, it kind of sits like this. And then around the same time, like I said, we have the consciousness connection hub that is taking form right around here. And the base layer of this tends to be a toroidal sphere as well. And as they develop, these become like almost like internalized auric fields. They become much more complex to where they're not really an auric field, but they maintain an aura field around them. That an auric field, whenever I talk about it in soul mechanics, it's usually an amalgamate essence that is reflecting the average or base information about what's going on in the internalized mechanism that it is linked to. So a lot of times soul surgeons and architects and all that, we will look at a grid or an auric field first to kind of get an initial diagnosis of which mechanisms need more minute refinement or adjustment, that kind of thing. And it can kind of give you, in your own exploration of your own energy field, once you start tapping into the different layers of your auric field, then it can be an easy way to start tuning in to the more specialized mechanisms within your soul body. And so this is a toroidal sphere that would exist, like I said, a lot more internally in the soul body, and it's very specifically tied to the consciousness connection hub, which, it would be tied to things like your third eye and your neural network and things like that in the human soul body. So this is the first 5, the most foundational first 5 expressions of soul mechanisms in your soul body. This is just kind of a crash course and getting a feel for the energetic flow and the energetic structures. And then we are going to revisit this in the next video that I will share with you about this concept in the context of breath. And then I have another one that will be on the context that we'll explore 5 more soul mechanisms that are more specific to our earth experience and what's most important for us to be aware of now. And the ones tied to a lot of our collective energy shifts and a lot of our planetary soul mechanism evolutions we're experiencing right now. And so we'll talk about that, looking at it from the lens of the planetary body in that one when that is ready to come out. So, but this just kind of gives you a feel for the early development of a soul body and what that kind of looks like. It's a very, simplified look that is going to make a lot more sense when I share with you the breath exercises that we're going to be exploring for eclipse season and caretakership, initiation, integration, and awakening and illuminating the soul body. Because everything that I've showed you right here, this base level, this is pretty much what we've had access to as a society in recent generations. This is what our energy body is basically, what should be much more complex soul body structures has kind of been crammed into a modified version of this very base level version of the soul body system. So This should feel very familiar to you in a lot of ways, because it is what all of you have already been working with and adjusting to and developing in your own energetic discernment and energy body exploration. But till next time.